So a few years ago, I found myself here at Edinburgh University presenting some theological research at their Hogwarts-looking divinity school. And it was my first time going to the UK, so I packed all my warmest clothes, expecting a kind of true UK weather experience, only to be met by a heat wave. I felt quite ripped off. It's like going to Auckland and there being no traffic, or going to Kaiapoi and people being well dressed, or going to Gore and it being fun or something like that. It's just ridiculous. And you wouldn't believe it, during this heat wave, I swear the only place to get a refreshing drink was at this whiskey distillery. Not that one, that's something completely different. Oh, no. As the whiskey, it's still kind of, I can't drive this thing anymore. Can we go to that whiskey slide? Yes, in rural Scotland, about an hour and a half out of Edinburgh. And you wouldn't believe it, but they only had 20-year-old cask strength single malt. So reluctantly, I partook straight from the barrel. But the research I presented at Edinburgh all started from me reading a very, very unusual news article back in 2019. And it was an article so bizarre, it sent me spiraling into a kind of academic wormhole, so severe it only ended on this trip here. And this was the article. It's the story of a man named Raphael Samuel who sued his parents for the slightly outlandish reason of bringing him into existence. His parents, both of whom were lawyers, were relatively generous in speaking about him to the media, but ultimately vowed to destroy him in court. And the reason Raphael took this line of action is because he is part of a growing movement called the anti-natalist movement. And anti-natalism is an increasingly popular movement that claims that it's not only undesirable, but actually immoral to bring children into this world due to life sucking and progressively sucking more in their view. One of the leading anti-natalist philosophers, David Benatar, writes, "The only way to guarantee that some future possible person will not suffer harm is to ensure that possible person never becomes an actual person." And Benatar ultimately argues that extinction within a few generations is to be preferred. So David Benatar is known for being super fun at parties. And anti-natalist activist groups are on the rise globally. On one of the activist groups' websites, stophavingkids.org, you can even buy anti-natalist merch, like bumper stickers that say, "No babies on board," or even "Join the vasectomy club." Which, if you live in my house, is increasingly tempting, but we won't go into that. Yeah, you'll notice it a lot, mate. And to prove that this isn't just a Matt Maslin niche wormhole, which it very much is, here is a sighting of this very activist group, stophavingkids.org, protesting in our own city just last year. I think that this movement is an interesting cultural artifact, a strange tip of a cultural iceberg of hopelessness and despair. People on the whole are no longer confident that this world is heading in a good direction. When I was younger and I imagined the future of the world, I imagined it as a place that would be better when I get older. But when I talk to young people now, they no longer have this confidence. People are losing hope that this big story of life has a good ending. And research in New Zealand has shown that the top longing for people in this country, that which 58% of New Zealanders desire, is hope for the future. And it's easy for all of us to feel this way with poverty and homelessness, with climate change, with the unfathomable destruction of lives and livelihoods of those in Gaza, with the invasion of Ukraine. There's Sudan, Nepal, Nigeria, there's mental illness, there's a loneliness epidemic, there's AI, there's fake news, there's fake tan on presidents. All the while, we have access and updates to these atrocities at all times and in all places through our phones. I was wondering why I really needed an update on my phone for this not long ago, just to help you sleep at night. They're getting stronger. The Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan, an early media theorist, once said that media stretches our nervous system into the world transcending time and space. He notes how the wheel extends our feet, the phone extends our voice, television extends our eyes and ears, the computer extends our brain, and electronic media in general extends our central nervous system. Media means we are constantly connected to the tragedies and injustices of this world. And obviously, this can be a very good thing. We can intercede. We can respond practically. We can hopefully be informed. But all of this also does something to us and our ability to navigate the future, something that many people don't have the philosophical tools to do so. So how do we maintain our pursuit of hope and justice in a world where we so heavily feel its discouragement and despair, where we are so consistently confronted with its injustice, where we so often lose heart and grow weary? In our parable today, we have a widow going to an unjust judge, nagging him constantly for justice against her opponent. He refuses because, as he says himself, "I have no fear of God nor respect for anyone." At least you know where you stand with this guy. Until he finally caves, not because he actually cares about seeking justice, but because he didn't want to be worn out by the widow's nagging and continually coming to him to plead with him, which is the story's a little less ridiculous if you live with a toddler, trust me. But the parable is what's rhetorically called a how much more argument. Jesus makes them quite regularly. It's where Jesus uses an example and then contrasts how much more God would do in this situation. So in this case, if this judge who doesn't fear God and only thinks of his own well-being finally takes pity on a lowly widow, then how much more would a just and loving God? And in the story, I think we see two invitations or even mandates for what I would call holy nagging. The first is the invitation to nag God, to bring our frustrations, our desperate pleas to him, to plead our case for justice on this earth. And we see this kind of harshly honest discontent and anger and injustice throughout our scriptures. Think of Habakkuk 1:4, where it's proclaimed that justice never prevails. Or in Job, where he laments, "I call aloud, but there is no justice." God can handle or even encourages our nagging of him because it reveals our innermost desire for God's kingdom. It reveals our desire for God's kingdom to come, a prayer that Jesus instructed us to pray, but also a prayer that betrays the fact that God's kingdom is not here yet. It's in this nagging, the prioritization of prayer, that we see how the Spirit is aligning us with God's purposes. That as we posture ourselves towards heartbreak and being indignant for the suffering of others, that we find God, because this is where God is too. And for whatever reason, God has chosen people to be a central part of God's achieving God's plans in this world. And prayer is a key pipeline to this mission. Because through prayer, we become connected with God's heart for justice, but also God's power to respond to injustice. And we must note that some of the largest movements of social reform in the last 100 years have been powered by prayer, fueled by discontent with injustice. So when the Berlin Wall fell, it's estimated that 300,000 people were praying in the German city of Leipzig. And this movement began in 1980 at the Church of St. Nicholas, with only a small congregation of worshippers who began to host Monday night prayers for peace meetings. And they would begin by reciting the Beatitudes from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It soon swelled into a huge movement of prayer. And the day after the wall fell, the pastor of St. Nicholas said the government was prepared for every possibility except prayer and candles. William Wilberforce, who led the movement to abolish slavery, kept an intercession journal of people and situations to pray for. And he belonged to this group, the Clapham sect, that were committed to regularly praying for change and reform in society in Great Britain. Martin Luther King built the civil rights movement on a foundation of prayer. He committed to both publicly and privately praying that God would do something in the hearts of American people. And he prayed specifically, "To thee we look for whatever good the future holds. We are not satisfied with the world as we have found it. It is too little of the kingdom of God as yet." We are not satisfied with the world as we have found it. It is too little of the kingdom of God as yet. As we all face the feeling of hopelessness in the face of suffering in the world, these are the kinds of prayers that our parable permits, and perhaps that we need this morning. The second invitation is to nag the earthly structures of injustice. The widow is someone who has no voice. The Old Testament designates the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, the most vulnerable and in need of care. Because of how society was structured, none of these people would have an adult to stand up for them, not least in court. Who is the widow to ask for justice, and who is the judge that he would grant it? Imagine the discouragement the widow faced in her continued pleas. We are left to imagine how long she had been pleading her case for. And she is also facing a double injustice. The injustice that she faces from both her opponent and of the system that is meant to keep her opponent accountable. All the data her life was giving her was telling her that the system she was fighting against was unmovable. But she still perseveres for justice, maybe even naively, but certainly with hope. Because hope is not blind to optimism, but a resilient and gritty thing that survives in the most unlikely of places. Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann claims, hopefully, that hope is an act of human courage that refuses to cherish the present too much or be reduced but to despair by present circumstances. Hope is the capacity to relinquish the present for the sake of what is imagined to be a reachable future. Hope, in the end, is a contradiction of the dominant version of reality. This is what the widow does. She refuses to be reduced to despair by her present circumstances, but instead plows on ahead for an imagined reachable future, God's future, which is being drawn into the present. And so the pursuit of justice needs Christian hope, because without it, what we are faced with has the capacity to reduce us to despair. So the widow's resilient hope drives her to have the persistence she needs to nag the system that was wronging her to change. But I would say, Lord, have mercy if she has to do this on her own. We as the church are not called just to transform inner worlds, but outer ones as well, the ones that oppress people like the widow, so she doesn't have to fight on her own. We are not just seeking the restoration of individual lives, but of God's world and the systems that inhabit it. God's justice is this world made right, and sometimes participating in the world being made right means nagging systems and structures and leaders and organizations that cause others harm. In these instances, I believe that persistent nagging for justice is actually a spiritual discipline. For me, I see this as part of being a priest, because my job is not just to see people delivered from their internal spiritual chains, but to discover the fullness of God's flourishing through the removal of their structural ones as well. And so I don't do it as often as I would like to, but I think I can be a bit of a holy pain in the ass. I send letters to politicians regularly advocating for the oppressed. I'll fight it out at a liquor license hearing. I'll bring a politician to come with me to be with the homeless. I'm even currently advocating for some staff at a toxic workplace. Justice is when we say no to God's creation being distorted, whatever this looks like. And justice often happens when hope gets stubborn, when we persist in prayer and advocacy for things to be put right, when we die to self in such a way that we feel no social shame or embarrassment for the relentless pursuit of shalom and goodness in this world. So may you go this morning with a heart attuned to heaven's ache for the oppressed, and the courage to speak when silence serves no one, with a hope rooted not in ease, but in the God who hears, who sees, and who acts, often through you and I. And may you go this morning with hands ready to bear the weight of holy persistence, that the world might bend a little more towards mercy. Amen.